back in here, getting back to the action on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to now talk about a brand new game that we have kicking off in just about an hour and 15 minutes, I want to say it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern Time or 8:15 between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, it's 8:15. So an hour and 15 minutes to kick off just based on our live time. And it's the second game of the regular season tonight. Green Bay taking on the Eagles in Brazil, down in South America. The first ever NFL game down in that continent, but also obviously in Brazil. The game tonight is exclusively on Peacock for anybody wondering why they can't find the game or where the NFL is going to air this game. It's going to be exclusively on Peacock. So in case you didn't know that, there you go. Philadelphia is technically the home game in this game, obviously being played at a neutral site, but Philadelphia is considered the home team in this contest. And now starting off with the Eagles and some of the news, additions, and departures that we can look forward to in this game. Starting on the injury front, no Devin White tonight for the Eagles. Unfortunately, he did not travel down to Brazil because of an ankle injury he suffered this week in practice. That means that Zach Braun and Kobe Dean will be most likely the inside linebackers, the starting inside linebackers for the Eagles. It'll be the first game for Saquon Barkley, also for the Eagles as well. Weird circumstance having your first game be in a different continent, but that's the environment that we find ourselves in with Saquon and the Eagles. The first game also without Jason Kelce, Cam Jurgens will now be the starting center. And along those lines, Mekhi Becton, the former first round pick for the New York Jets, now on the Eagles, he is likely to start at guard for them this evening if everything goes according to plan based on how he has been performing in training camp. I expect to see him out there at right guard, and that is as a result of Cam Jurgens moving over to center from playing right guard last year. So Mekhi Becton could be starting a different path in his career now because he was drafted to be an offensive tackle, but he's found a home there at guard for the Philadelphia Eagles, so that should be interesting on how he maneuvers and how they deploy him there. And also looking at some more of the new players that the Eagles will bring to them down in Brazil. You have CJ Gardner-Johnson coming back to them, Quinyon Mitchell projected to start at slot tonight, or we could see him get some reps on the outside as well. Jahan Dotson, traded over from the Commanders, will be making his debut tonight. And Bryce Huff, also coming over from the New York Jets in free agency this year for the Eagles. So that's all the pieces of news on any injuries, additions, and departures for them. No Devin White is going to be huge, but still a lot of anticipation with a lot of these new players. None more than Saquon Barkley. So that's what we got on the Philadelphia Eagles side of things. Then you look at the Packers, same thing. There's no real big injury news with them or any doubts going into tonight's game that I have been able to see. And talking about some of their new acquisitions in free agency, it doesn't get any bigger than Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney as well on the defensive side of the ball. Both were added in free agency. And then you look also as well at some of their departures, like John Runyon on the offensive line. They feel pretty confident on how they've been able to replace, John Runyon on this offensive line, but that is still something that they're going to have to keep an eye on because John Runyon is a very good player, obviously a monumental piece to that offensive line. Now he's in New York, and how that offensive line now operates should be something to keep in mind. And talking some more about Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, both guys are going to bring a lot to this team on both sides of the ball. Obviously, Josh coming in to essentially replace Aaron Jones, and I think you're going to get about the same workload, but I'm going to also keep in mind the idea that A.J. Dillon will not be playing at all this year. He is on the season-ending IR with, I believe, a neck injury, so how many carries Josh Jacobs gets, how many they deploy to a backup running back will also be fascinating to follow in the course of not just this game, but also the entire regular season. And Xavier McKinney is an underrated addition just because I think he has great potential to really make an impact on any defense, and he did make one with the New York Giants, but obviously a lot of people overlooked it just because the Giants might not have been performing up to the level of a player like Xavier McKinney, so you don't really get to hear about him as much. Now, with the Packers, very much a contending team, I think he could be a standout player for them. I really do. Him alongside Jair Alexander will be one of the better duos in a secondary, environment in the NFL. And then also, the Packers have the quantities at wide receiver, at the weapons for Jordan Love. Now it's just about building around it. And we're going to see a bunch of those guys on the offensive side of the ball for the Packers in tonight's game. Dontavion Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Reed. All those guys are going to be. Christian Watson is the other one. All those guys should be healthy and ready to go. And I'll be also interested to see how they're looking now in a second year, now having a lot more people know who they are, quite honestly, and preparing for them, how they're able to deal with that and, bring that up into this big year now where they're looked at more as the favorites rather than the underdogs that people just count out because they're extremely young. That's a different environment now, a different area that they're going to have to move through. But speaking of moving on, we're going to talk about now the matchups and the keys to this game. There's quite a few of them that you look at and that I'm really going to keep an eye on as well throughout the rest of tonight's game. And we'll probably talk about it on Monday with how this game turns out. But one of the bigger ones is the new Philadelphia O-line and going up against the somewhat different Green Bay Packers defensive line. The Eagles, like we mentioned before, Cam Jurgens moving over to center, huge change from an exchange standpoint, right? Cam Jurgens probably doesn't snap the ball exactly like Jason Kelce does, so making sure there's no issues there. The snaps are clean, no problems happen with that because that's the last thing you want to have problems with. Obviously, how they operate that, Mekhi Becton, like I mentioned before, at guard for them, how those two guys operate in their new roles, and Green Bay Packers, how they're able to, make an impact on this new offensive line for the Eagles. A lot will change with Jason Kelce not being there in terms of calling out certain alignments, certain assignments as well. Not having his veteran presence in there should be something to keep an eye on as well. Then you look at the next level on that defense. You look at Nakobe Dean and Zach Braun going up against Jordan Love. The quarterback of the defense, depending on who it is, Zach Braun or Nakobe Dean, calling the plays in response to Jordan Love and how they audible out of those plays, how they play off of each other, how one side counters the other. It's going to be super interesting because we're talking about some young players on each side, and also, it's just that chess match within the entirety of the game that ultimately makes a big difference, right? When you have a great quarterback going up against, the linebackers calling the plays and whatnot, it makes a big difference when you shift the protection alignment or you audible to a different play. How does the defense, audible on your audible and things like that. How whoever the quarterback is on the defense for the Eagles, how they respond to Jordan Love should be an interesting matchup to go on throughout the entire game. Then also, you look at the Green Bay Packers wide receivers, all four of them going up against that new Philadelphia Eagles secondary, how they line up. Does Darius Slay follow? Who does he match up against more tonight out of all those four guys? Quinyon Mitchell, how many looks does he get? Do they try to target him because he's a rookie? Along those lines, CJ Gardner-Johnson, how he moves around the backfield in the secondary. How does that affect Jordan Love? Trying to get the ball to these guys. It's going to be super fascinating how each coach maneuvers their pieces to try and get them in the best position possible. And along those lines, another matchup that I'm looking at is Matt LaFleur going up against Nick Sirianni, and also the coordinators, right? Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore making their debuts tonight for the Philadelphia Eagles. And on the other side, going up against Stenovich, the offensive coordinator for the Packers, and the new defensive coordinator for the Packers, Jeff Hafley. the head coach at Boston College over the last 4 seasons. He is now a new coach in the NFL, defensive coordinator for the Packers. How do they have their matchups? How does it all turn out? And which duo ends up being the victor in this matchup in tonight's game? And then also just looking at it similarly, how does this new Philadelphia Eagles defense overall look going into this matchup with Jordan Love, right? Very exciting offense going up against a relatively new defense with the Eagles, new coordinator, new everything, right? New scheme, new idea, and everything. Who comes out on top will be a big determinant in this game. How efficient does the Eagles offense look, right? With all their great all-pro weapons, A.J. Brown, Smitty, Saquon, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert. How efficient do they look right off of the bat, trying to incorporate all these pieces, right? Because it looks great on paper. We saw it last night with Derrick Henry and this Ravens offense. But actually executing and knowing when to use what player is a lot harder than it looks. So how efficient they look right off of the bat will be huge. And also, I think tonight's game is going to be very offensive based, very heavy on the points, if you will. So the last key to this game will be which defense makes more stops, and also which one comes at the biggest moment, right? Because I feel like we're going to have a big moment like we had in last night's game, or a couple of them. You never know. So this new Eagles defense, are they able to muster up some stops, especially without Devin White, to stop Jordan Love? And similarly to this Packers defense, is there any way they can stifle all those great players that the Eagles have? It's going to be super fascinating to watch. And lastly, my prediction for tonight's game, I feel like it's similar to yesterday's game. I think the Eagles at this point in time have too many things to still figure out. You know, it's all there on the wall. You're just trying to figure out where and how and when to use some of these pieces, whereas the Packers are coming into this game with really only Josh Jacobs being incorporated into their offense and some new additions on defense. But it's relatively the same. Head coach, coordinators, pretty much all the same. I think they're just a step ahead in terms of where they want to be, closer to their final form. So I think the Packers will just edge it out tonight. I'm going to say 27-21 will be the final score. Packers go 1-0 and the Eagles fall to 0-1. And also, the last thing I'll throw out is just my confidence in Matt LaFleur. I think is exceeding my confidence in Nick Sirianni. I think there's a lot of talks around Nick Sirianni in terms of the coaching, his relationship with Jalen Hurts. You never hear any of that with Matt LaFleur. So I think just my confidence in the coaching also will make a difference in tonight's game. But regardless of that, it's going to be an awesome game. I hope everything turns out well down there in Brazil for the NFL's sake and just the sake of this game also. But that game is set to kick off in about 45, or actually an hour. It's about to kick off in an hour here Eastern time, so we'll be tuning into that. But moving on to the last couple segments we have on today's show, we have what is holding up Dak Prescott's extension. There was a report on what could be the deciding factor on whether or not the Cowboys give Dak Prescott that extension. We're going to get into that. And then the last segment will just be running through the remainder of Week 1 matchups and picking who wins and who loses in the other 14 games that we have on Sunday and on Monday as well. So we'll be right back with both of those topics. Don't go anywhere.